Skin of My Tooth, his memoirs by his confidential clerk, compiled and edited by the Baroness Orczy. Number 3. The Case of Major Gibson. I have always wondered why Skin of My Tooth was so unpopular with his own profession. He had very few friends among his colleagues, but those he had were certainly very staunch. I have heard it said that his ways were unprofessional. Certain it is that he avoided actual litigation for his clients whenever that was possible. I suppose that would be called unprofessional. Personally, I have never met a man of such varying moods. Over the Swanborough murder case, he was alert, uncanny, and irritatingly active. Over Major Gibson's case, he always looked as if he was going to sleep, and as if any trashy French novel were more interesting than the honor of his client. Now, I remember when Major Gibson first called upon him and told him his story, I thought to myself, here's the prettiest kettle of fish that ever Skin of My Tooth had placed before him. He was a good-looking man, this Major Gibson, but the day he called at the office, he looked as white as a ghost. He began by saying that unless Mr. Mulligan would help him, he had made all arrangements for committing suicide. I could see that he did not quite know how to begin. Skin of My Tooth did not evidently come up to the imaginary portrait of gallant Major's imagination had drawn for himself. I must say that my esteemed chief looked particularly fat, pink, and inane in the morning. I always like to hear the story from the beginning, he said, as he quietly, without asking his client's leave, lighted a huge German long-stemmed pipe. For a moment I thought that the Major was going to make an ass of himself and leave the room and go and commit suicide, sooner than tell his tale to the ill-mannered Irish lawyer. But he was a tight hole, and he kept his temper. About a month ago, he began at last very abruptly, I was staying at the Belcher Hall in Miss Everard's place in Rutlandshire. This was a good deal of gambling going on there in the evenings. I am not a rich man. I disapprove, on principle, of playing games of hazard. Nevertheless, I played and lost one night. Dates, please, whenever possible, interrupted Skin of My Tooth quietly. October 18th, 1901, said Major Gibson, whilst I, knowing what would be expected to me presently, made a rapid shorthand notes, as my imperfect training would allow. At 11 o'clock p.m., I at last left the baccarat table at Belcher Hall, with my last possible cheque on my current account drawn to bearer, and promissory notes amounting to close on £8,000 in the hands of various gentlemen, my fellow guests in the hospital mansion of Belcher Hall. I must say that the Everard was exceedingly nice to me later on in the billiard room, when he had a smoke and a drink together. I was a fool and mistook his kind words for genuine sympathy. I admitted to him that I had lost a great deal more than I could possibly afford, and that there was nothing for it but I must exchange into some Indian regiment and put off my proposed marriage until I had in some measure retrieved my heavy losses, or if the lady were unwilling to wait, to give her back her word and her liberty. I think Everard must have understood how hard this would become to me. Only a month ago I had become engaged to his wife's niece, Miss Marian Sutcliffe, to whom I was passionately attached. I am not a young man, and I did not fall in and out of love as quickly as some of my contemporaries. He broke off abruptly. Evidently his subject of Miss Marian was still a sore one. How long did the interview last? With Everard, I mean, asked Skin of My Teeth quietly. At 12 o'clock precisely I left him, intending to go to bed, but I knew that I should find it very difficult to get to sleep. I strolled into the library, a beautiful room on the ground floor, with deep mullioned windows. I meant to get a book and then to retire to my room. I remember that the room was quite dark when I went in, and as the heavy curtains had been drawn closely across the deep window recesses. As I did not know where or how to switch on the electric light, I went up to one of the windows, meaning to draw the curtains aside and let a flood of moonlight into the room. But the garden looked so fine and poetic, and I felt so moody and wretched that, quite contrary to my usual habits, I sat down in one of the deep window seats and stared out, mooning, thinking of nothing in particular, into the garden before me. How long I remained there, I cannot tell you. Certain it is that suddenly I became aware that someone was in the library besides myself. I had not heard the door open or shut, and I did not know who the someone was. I only inferred that it was a lady, for I could hear the rustle of a silk gown against the parquet floor as she and her turn went up to one of the windows. Major Gibson paused for a moment there, giving me time for the space of 30 seconds to at least stretch out my cramped muscles. The skin of my tooth had not said a word. He was looking down at the meerschaum bowl with a long-stemmed pipe, whilst a coy and gentle smile played round the fat corners of his mouth. Major Gibson passed his hand over his forehead once or twice. I know that he was cursing himself for the fool he had been at 1 a.m. on the memorable night of October 18th, 1901. "I can assure you," he said at last, "that nothing in particular crossed my mind when I heard the rustle of that silk dress, and certainly the next moment I should have made my presence known to the midnight wanderer. But just then I happened to have my head turned towards the garden, and to have caught sight of the figure of the man cautiously making his way towards the library windows. I was keeping, as much as possible, within the shadow of the trees. A second later, I heard a gentle whistle. The window furthest from the one in which I was sitting opened, then shut, and I realized the most discreet and prudent thing I could now do was to keep as quiet as possible. I possibly could for the present, if I were undetected later on, to feign a deep and uninterrupted sleep. "Discreet and prudent," commented Skin of my Tooth with a smile. "It is strange how we all differ in the meaning of those two words." "I am wise, too, now after the event," retorted Major Gibson with a little impatiently. "At the time I did not think I was doing the slightest harm either to myself or to the two who were having this clandestine meeting in this extraordinary hour. Remember, the room was quite dark. The man, whoever he was, had evidently slipped through the window, and no one had drawn the curtains. I heard some hurried whispers, then the man spoke impatiently. "Have you brought them anyway?" What the lady replied I could not hear, but it was evidently satisfactory, for he said quite loudly, "That's all right. Let's have a look." I remember it struck me at the time that the midnight intruder did not seem particularly tender. It came very soon and to an end. Curiosity was supposed to be a feminine vice, but I can assure you that at that moment I was positively devoured with curiosity as to who the lady was who could thus risk the whole edifice of her social position for the sake of some individual who was evidently unscrupulous and obviously was none too tender. I heard again the rustle of the dress. The lady was returning to her own room, leaving the man to find his way out alone. I put one finger on the curtain, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but I only saw the shimmer of the green silk train as a ray of moonlight caught it. Then she glided out of the room. I remembered all the ladies who were staying in the house. I had seen them in the drawing room before the miserable baccarat party. I remembered, too, that Mrs. Everard, our beautiful hostess, who was very fair, wore a magnificent green satin gown. I also remembered that Marion, my Marion, Miss Everard's niece, had looked bewitching in a clinging green frock with a long train. Of course, Marion was out of the question. You will understand that, won't you? The very thought was preposterous. But Miss Everard, my friend's wife, young and pretty, I assure you my head was in a whirl. I had not moved. I had forgotten the man until a flood of brilliant light startled me from my dream. I attempted to push aside the curtains, and immediately beneath one of the electric light brackets, which had evidently just been switched on, a man was standing with his back to me. He was examining intently something which he held in his hand. My instinct was to knock him down then and there, like the foul thief he is. But I suppose I must have made a noise when I crossed the room, for he turned before I could reach him. Then I saw what he held in his hand. It was a necklace of pearls and diamonds which I had before now seen around Mrs. Edwards' neck. "I don't really think," continued Major Gibson after another little pause, "that I can tell you exactly what happened after that. All I can remember is that I had him on the floor, and that I would have killed him if he had not at least reluctantly given back the necklace. I did not strike you that it might be the best thing to ring for the servants, so that to give him the charge like a thief he was. I skinned my tooth after a while, during which he was contemplating the unfortunate Major through his half-closed lids. I thought of it for a moment, but you did not do it." "No. Why?" "Because he swore to make a scandal if I denounced him. I had not seen the woman, and I was not sure. But there on the floor, close to the door, was a bunch of pink roses which I had given to Marion a few hours ago." "I see," said Skin-o'-my-tooth with a smile. There was a silence in the room for a moment, whilst I had a chance of cracking my knuckles, which were horribly stiff and cramped. "I think I can guess what happened after that," said Skin-o'-my-tooth, at last talking the pipe out of his mouth. The Major did not reply, and he went on. "You sent the thief about his business, and you yourself were discovered 5 minutes later in that necklace in your hand, unable or unwilling to give an account as to how you had come across it." Major Gibson nodded. "Met Everard just outside the library. He caught sight of the necklace in my hand even before he had recovered from his surprise of finding me there were at that hour. He asked me for an explanation. I could give him none. That is to say, I gave him one as near as the truth I dared, which he, of course, disbelieved. I gave him back the necklace, and he told me what hour I could get back on the train to town. He was supposed to be a friend of mine, but he thought me guilty. You see, he knew how heavily I had lost at cards. I had myself told him that I was sorely pressed for money, and might have to break off my engagement, and even leave for India." "You tell me that explanation you did give to Mr. Everard," interrupted Skin-o'-my-tooth quietly. "I told him that I was going to the library late at night to fetch a book, and I had found a man there with Miss Everard's necklace in his hand. That I succeeded in getting the necklace from him, but that he, in his turn, succeeded in getting away through the window." "He naturally asked you why you did not raise an alarm." "He did." "And also whether you would recognize the supposed thief if you saw him again." "Quite so. Your replies not being very lucid, he drew his own conclusions. But forgive my interrupting you. You have not quite finished, I think." "I haven't much more to tell you. It appears that the ladies went up to their rooms soon after 12, the men staying down in the billiard room to smoke. But at last everyone retired, and Everard himself was about to do the same when his wife, fully dressed still, met him on the stairs, with the news that one of her most valuable necklaces had been stolen. She was putting away the jewels which she had just been wearing, when she noticed that one of the cases was empty. Everard persuaded her to go back to her room, and he himself started on a tour of inspection of the house." "And he met you?" "And he met me, as you say." "Then that is all you have to tell me." "That is all. Everard was up in time to see me before I left in the morning. He and Lord Cumberry, the colonel of my regiment, both tried to persuade me to confess, and promised as an inducement that I would be made a clean breast of it all, and agreed to exchange in some native regiment and to break off my engagement with Miss Sutcliffe. The whole matter should be hushed up." "And you promised?" "I promised nothing." "The result being?" "That the scandal was gone around in town. I've been requested to hand in my papers, and in my clubs it has been strongly hinted to me that I should be turned out unless I succeeded in clearing my character." "And so far you have not attempted to mention the lady's name." "Would I not be branded as a worse blackguard than before, for slandering a woman in order to try to save my own skin? And I was not sure, remember. I did not know who the lady was." Have you any conviction now? The Major hesitated a moment, and then he quietly said, No. Part 2. There was a silence in the room for a long time after that. The Major was starting moodily into the fire. The skin of my tooth was puffing away at his old German pipe, smiling gently to himself. Presently he began to hum a tune, and he looked so coy and fat and comfortable. No wonder he jarred the unfortunate Major's nerves. Well, sir, said the latter to the very last irritably. The skin of my tooth smothered a yawn. I was waiting. For what? To hear what you were going to do. Here the Major swore vigorously. Do you think I should be here now, he said, if I knew? The few friends I have got left to advise a slander action, and I have come to consult you, as someone who has told me that you are the ablest man in London in cases of this sort. That someone, no doubt, said you had a jolly bad case and required the unscrupulous devil like Patrick Mulligan to pull you through, remarked Skin of my Tooth dryly. I could see from the deep red of the Major's bronzed cheek that my esteemed employer had guessed right. Skin of my Tooth settled himself within the depths of his large, shabby leather armchair. He smothered another yawn with an attempt at politeness. He looked, in fact, as if he were getting very tired of the whole thing and longed to get back to his favorite French novel, the yellow paper cover of which was even now protruding from one of his pockets of his ill-fitting coat. A slander action in this case would be a very trickish matter, he said at last. Mr. Everett, against whom I suppose you would enter it, would plead justification, and you must own that the circumstances of the case are decidedly in his favor. He finds you a very ambiguous person, and the explanations you give are terribly lame. You might get damages 1 farthing, which would do you no more harm than good, and effectively kill the last shreds of reputation you have got left. But there is one thing, of course, which you can put you right, and that is a confession from the lady. Impossible. Why? Is it likely? I think so. You have come to me for advice. It is the only one I can give. Some of my more eminent colleagues would no doubt suggest an action, but these same eminent gentlemen will tell you that Patrick Mulligan has no reputation to mar. His ways are tortuous, his means unscrupulous. Perhaps they are right, and you are willing to adopt these ways and means as follow my advice unreservedly. You will scrape through this hole by the skin of your teeth, I tell you, and I will pledge the evil reputation I have got that we'll obtain a confession from this unknown lady. It would have to be a public one now, I am afraid, to do me any good. It will be sufficient. I give you my... No, I won't give you my word. It wouldn't do much good to you. But ask the most disreputable character in the London slums when Skin of my Tooth has said, I'll do it, whether he is a man to break his word. No wonder the Major looked a new man. I've seen many a poor chap look like that when once they have had a square talk with Skin of my Tooth. By gosh, but he knows how to carry conviction with him. When he talks to a client or to the jury, it's all the same. They run after him like a pack of sheep. And now, my dear Major, he concluded, which day will be convenient for you to meet Mr. Everard? Meet Everard? Guessed the Major. I wouldn't care to... Sir, said Skin of my Tooth with his gentle smile, just now I used the word unreservedly. I will not move on this matter unless I profess your entire confidence. The Major hesitated no longer. Skin of my Tooth was his last straw. You do what you think best, he said doggedly, but Everard will refuse. When's in next, shall we say? At 3 p.m. That will suit you? Muggins, make a note of that. Everard will refuse, repeated the Major. I think not, said Skin of my Tooth with a smile. I have your permission to proceed. As you will. And you place yourself unreservedly in my hands. For one brief second the Major hesitated, while his quick, sharp, clear, honest eyes scanned quickly the fat, unwieldy figure huddled up in an armchair, the sleepy eyes with their drooping lids, the ill-fitting shiny black coat, and that yellow-backed French novel protruding from his pocket. Skin of my Tooth sat there, and the coy smile of his playing around the corners of his mouth. Then the Major, with a sudden frank gesture, put out his hand and said firmly, "Without reserve." "Muggins, show the Major out," said my chief, with sudden, obvious alacrity. When I came back, having shown the Major downstairs, I found Skin of my Tooth absorbed in his French novel. I waited for a while, then, as he did speak, I asked at last, "What am I to do now, sir?" "Nothing, my boy, nothing," he said airily. "Confine yourself to not being an ass for the rest of the afternoon. That will always be something accomplished. In the meantime, you can hand me down Burke's Landed Gentry from that shelf." I gave him the book he wanted. Then he added, "By the way, Muggins, copy out of your notes on a sheet of parchment and gross them neatly. We may require them in that form later on." Part 3. Mr. Everard, strange to say, was willing enough to meet Major Gibson and his solicitor, and talk of the matter over amicably if possible. I fancy he's a decent enough sort of man, and is only too ready to see the end of this unfortunate business. Moreover, I don't suppose that he, either, cared to take the chances of defending a slander action. If by any chance Major Gibson succeeded in making his case good, he would get such a thundering damages that even Mr. Everard, rich as he would not care to pay. It was finally arranged that Mr. Gibson, accompanied by Mr. Patrick Mulligan and myself, should be at the Everard's house in Park Lane on Wednesday at 3:30. Of course, Mr. Everard's solicitor would also be present, also Lord Comerbury, and by special request of Major Gibson, as represented by Mr. Mullins, Mr. Everard and Miss Marion Sutcliffe. I had not the least idea of what Skin of my Tooth was up to, but that whole of that morning, while he was reading his French novel, I saw him smile to himself that funny, coy, and gentle smile which always meant mischief to his adversaries. I remember feeling that in the interview, like the character of the French play, everyone wore a frock coat except myself. Skin of my Tooth was very shabby and fitted him badly, and from one of the pockets a yellow-backed book protruded very conspicuously. We were shown to a fine dining room, oak-paneled, magnificently furnished. There was a large fire in the big open grate, and the two ladies, when we came in, I did not know which was Mrs. Everard and which was Miss Sutcliffe, were sitting close beside it. Skin of my Tooth put down his hat and drew from his pocket the notes I had made, and carefully copied out the engrossed one of Major Gibson's case. This he placed in a little side table which stood close to the mantelpiece, and then all the gentlemen sat down around the large dining table, and the fun began. Skin of my Tooth started talking very quietly, I wondering all the time what he was driving at, and how he hoped to benefit the unfortunate Major by his extraordinary comedy. But he went on talking, and I must confess that never in my life had I heard such a fine string of lies so magnificently uttered. "I must thank you, ladies and gentlemen," he said, "for so kindly accepting my client's request. He felt, as I do, as you will, I'm sure, that nothing could be more deplorable than the dragging of this unfortunate affair before the public. Major Gibson has been, quite involuntarily, I feel confident, and still grossly maligned. I will ask you, gentlemen, not to interrupt me just now. You have your fling at us later on. For the present, you must allow me to state positively that Major Gibson is not only absolutely innocent of the ugly charge of theft proffered against him, but is even now the victim of a code of honor as chivalrous as it is misdirected." Skin of my Tooth then, with perfect suavity, started a highly colored account of the incidents in the library at Belcher Hall, as related to him by Major Gibson. The moonlit garden, the dark room, the rustle of the silk skirt, the clandestine meeting, Of the half-dozen people there present, every one of them, except myself, did their best to try not to stop him and sneer at him. Ejaculations, muttered in a whisper, broke out on every side. The ladies looked indescribably shocked and withering contemptuous, but Mr. Everard looked ready to knock Skin of my Tooth down, and his legal adviser talked of extraordinary allegations and of slander, and of thumping damages. The Skin of my Tooth sailed serenely on. When the interruptions became too loud, he shouted louder, and that was all. "Now, gentlemen," he said, "when you have quite done calling me a liar, I can get on all right. I don't blame you. I don't even mind telling you that I called Mr. Gibson a liar myself when I heard him tell his tale. You see, he keeps telling me that he had no proof, no witnesses to corroborate what he said. Now I am not one for believing that there is ever a truth without any proof. And when my client left me, I said to myself there must be some proof, some witness somewhere. Major Gibson did not recognize the lady. Good. But in that large house and grounds of Belcher Hall, full to overflowing with visitors and servants, someone, I cared not who, must have seen the unknown woman with a green gown, or that man. Some trace somewhere would have been left in her passage or his, some sign, some indication, whether traced by a man or by fate." Gradually, as he spoke, I noticed that the attitude of his hearers became considerably modified. There were no interruptions now, no whispered comments. Mr. Everard and the legal gentleman hung upon my chief's words. The Major himself looked as if he suddenly had a bright visa of hope, and had been opened before him. As for the ladies, one looked pale and breathless, while the other, leaned back in her chair, kept up the air of a dignified hauteur which some English ladies know how to wear when certain matters which they deem objectionable are discussed before them. In fact, when Skin of my Tooth paused for a moment and began fumbling in his pockets as if to search for something, this same haughty lady said quietly, "Do you think, Archibald, that in view of the matters which, Mr. Mulligan sees fit to discuss here, I and my niece had better go?" "I beg 1,000 pardons," said Skin of my Tooth vainly. "I have finished, and I assure you, please do not go. The matter will interest you both. Have I your permission to proceed? Many thanks. It is not necessary. I think for me to dwell here upon the ways and means I employed on behalf of my clients. You may imagine that I left no stone unturned." I was literally gasping, I can tell you. I'm a pretty good liar at my occasions. I would not enjoy Skin of my Tooth's confidence if I were not. But I had to humbly confess to myself that in the face of Skin of my Tooth's last assertion with regard to the stones, which, to my certain knowledge, were made of paper, and were all yellow-backed, and I was the only bungling botcher. But what I could not make out was what all his fumbling in his coat pockets meant. I thought that he was looking for the notes which I had written out so neatly and which he placed on the little side table close to the mantelpiece. Not a bit of it. When I made a movement to get them, he looked at me, and understood that I had better sit still and wait. "I am quite sure," continued Skin of my Tooth, after a little dramatic pause, during which I noticed that his whole bulky figure seemed as if it were a couch ready for a spring, "that you will understand what a glorious day it was for me and my client, Major Gibson, when at last my strenuous efforts were crowned with success. No, ladies and gentlemen, I am not mistaken. At the dense populated, magnificent mansion that I unearthed the man who, on that memorable night, was present near enough to the library of Belcher Hall to see the mysterious lady in the green gown give Miss Everard's necklace to the unknown thief. This man saw the whole scene from beginning to end. Reasons which I will explain to you presently, but which seemed paramount to him, forced him to silence until I compelled him to speak. He saw and would know again the man who, like a thief in the night, bullied and robbed the woman who was a fool enough to ruin her reputation for his sake. He heard the whispered conversation, saw the necklace pass from her hand to his. He recognized the mysterious lady in the green gown, and picked up, after she left, something which had belonged to her, which he holds still." Skin of my Tooth was surpassing himself. All of us felt as if the electricity filled the air. I'm sure that I was shaking with excitement from head to foot. Both Major Gibson and Mr. Everard were as pale as death, and I thought one of the ladies was about to faint. The other, whom I now knew was Miss Everard, had risen from her chair. She was now standing close to the little side table, almost immediately behind Skin of my Tooth, who suddenly, dropping his voice and lolling placidly in his chair, with a gentle smile and perfect matter-of-fact tones. Unfortunately, misfortune has dodged my steps, and rather those of the poor client. The witness I had so carefully unearthed died a couple of days ago, most unexpectedly. I wondered if I had been mistaken, but I certainly thought that I heard a very obvious sigh of relief from somewhere. Certain it was that spell of excitement under which we had lain was broken, and one or two ironical comments came at the end from the table where Miss Everard sat with his legal adviser. But I knew that Skin of my Tooth had something up his sleeve. I knew that smile of his. However, before the man died, I had succeeded in persuading him to swear to an affidavit stating all that he had seen. This affidavit I had brought here with me today, and then I knew what he was driving at all along. He was on the alert, and so was I. In the midst of his neatly told lie, he stopped and pointed towards my notes, which were lying on the side table close to the chimney. "Give me that affidavit, Muggins, my boy." But before I could reach them, before anyone had realized what she was doing, Miss Everard, as quick as lightning, seized the notes and thrown them in the fire, while she turned to Skin of my Tooth and said defiantly, "At any rate, the woman's name will now remain a secret forever." Then I understood. I cared nothing about the burning of my fingers, but I did not want to rescue the remaining fragments of my notes, because I knew they would be wanted. Miss Everard was glaring at old Skin of my Tooth as if she were a hungry tigress. If looks could kill, my esteemed employer would have been a dead man then. As it was, he smiled placidly, and taking the fragments of the half-burnt paper from me, he quietly smoothed them out and placed them on the table before Mr. Everard. Then he once more turned towards the angry lady. "My dear lady," he said very gently, "I feel that I have behaved towards you absolutely like the cad my eminent colleague here presents no doubt will call me. Just at this moment I know that you hate me for an odious comedy I have devised out of order to extort an unwilling confession from you. Yes, my dear lady, a comedy and a confession. I don't think that I am the only man here present who knows that the Honorable Thornby Oaksman, your brother, is a grave thorn in the distinguished family's flesh. That with somewhat impulsive thoughtlessness you tried to be the material assistant to him at the time that he was actually flying from the police, and unbeknown to your husband is only natural. That in trying to shield him from your own family honor, you allowed an innocent man to suffer so severely it only under the same circumstances most of your sex would have done. Let me in my turn confess to you, and to Mr. Everard, to whom I must also offer my humblest apologies, that the only witness present on that fateful night was Major Gibson himself. That affidavit which you hoped to destroy consisted of my clerk's notes on the facts taken under my unfortunate client's dictation. There is no woman's name mentioned throughout the few pages, but I think you will admit yourself that in trying to burn the documents, you identify yourself by your dainty hand, have plainly written your own. It is wonderful with what dignity Skin of my Tooth can speak when he likes. Mr. Everard looked as if he had some difficulty in standing straight. He did not look at his wife. She did not attempt to speak. What would be the outcome of the extraordinary scene, I could not conjecture. Evidently Skin of my Tooth was satisfied, for without another word he borrowed from everyone, and with Major Gibson left the room, followed by my humble self. As I passed out the door, I gave a final look around at the actors whom we had left on the stage. Mr. Everard had gone up to his wife, who had fallen sobbing into a chair. Miss Sutcliffe was kneeling beside her, trying to comfort her. Lord Cumberbury and the solicitor looked as if they wished themselves safely away. I must say Mr. Everard behaved very well in the matter. Both he and Lord Commonberry made it their business to see that no shadow of stained reputation remained on Major Gibson's reputation, though Miss Everard's name has, of course, never been mentioned. It all happened more than a year and a half ago, and everyone has, of course, heard of Colonel Gibson's gallant defense of Ellen's Drift with a handful of men. He was married to Miss Sutcliffe about a month ago, and Mr. and Mrs. Everard gave a magnificent reception at their fine house in Park Lane in honor of the bride and the bridegroom. I suppose there was supper served in the room in which we had sat on that day. Skin-o'-my-tooth was not asked to the wedding or reception. He would not have gone, however.